Good lady from 14.
Mr. Speaker, I kindly request that we cease, unanimous consent that we cease with the further reading of 666.
Unanimous consent has been requested. Is there objection? Hearing none, the good lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. For many years, I, as a parent, have been concerned about the obscene and pornographic materials that find their way into our school and public libraries. While I believe that this is happening inadvertently, the increasing frequency of exposure of our children to obscene and pornographic material in places that I, as a parent, consider safe and assume are free from these kinds of harmful materials is alarming. We can and should expect a level of vigilance in protecting our children from obscene and pornographic materials, particularly in public and school libraries in our communities. I know I don't need to tell you about how harmful this exposure is to children. Quite frankly, those that sat in these seats before us stated it very clearly in state laws and in the Constitution that have been on the books for decades. These code sections I have passed out. Hopefully they are finding their way to your desk. But let me just read, if I might, by unanimous consent, a statement from the American College of Pediatricians.
Unanimous consent has been requested to read. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the good lady may read.
Thank you. Again, from the American College of Pediatricians, and this doesn't go back decades. This is a current statement from that group concerning children. Children suffer many negative effects due to exposure to pornography. These negative effects include mental disturbance and unrest for the young school-aged child, including acting out and violent behavior. Because of its harmfulness to children, pornography should never be used as a tool to teach children human sexuality. So many people don't realize that our libraries don't have to follow these long-standing, from 1972, obscenity laws that have been established to protect children, much less the directives in our own state constitution. And let me just read again, if I might, from the Constitution, which states, the first concern of all good government is the virtue and sobriety of the people and the purity of the home. The legislature should further all wise and well-directed efforts for the promotion of temperance and the morality. That is Article 3, Section 24. This proposed legislation before you amends the code that removes the exemptions for an affirmative defense regarding the distribution of harmful materials such as obscene or pornographic depictions in books, movies, and all other media. The legislation would remove these exemptions of that prohibition that is given to schools, public libraries, universities, and museums by deleting Section D of 1815-17. Now, I think in taking this, the proposed legislation must be considered in terms of its context of the other laws that are already on the books. So, as mentioned, these sections of code that, again, have been on our books for decades, I'd like to just do a quick review of those to let you know what those do. In Section 1513, this section declares that it is the policy preference of the state of Idaho to, quote, sustain the distribution, promotion, or dissemination of obscene material or material harmful to minors. The next page you'll see is Section 1514 that I've handed out, and that section clearly defines what material is harmful to minors. It clarifies that the material harmful to minors must, when considered as a whole, those important words in terms of context, have the dominant effect of substantially arousing sexual desires in persons under the age of 18. So again, the context there is 18-year-olds and taken as a whole. Furthermore, no work or performance is harmful to minors if, when considered as a whole, it possesses serious, and again, might I just remind you, I'm providing context, it possesses serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. This already existing statutory definition removes any subjectivity and it creates guardrails that is much needed to prevent the kind of censorship of disliked books or movies, and it ensures that only works being prohibited to minors are indeed obscene. In 1515, there is an important word in that. I'll draw your attention to the knowingly standard. A person is only guilty of disseminating these materials that are harmful to minors if they do so knowingly. This, again, is a high threshold in terms of the threshold of a criminal capability than if someone recklessly disseminated harmful material to minors. And finally, we come then to today's legislation that's being considered. And that's in Section 1517, Section D. By removing this exemption for schools, libraries, museums, we are bringing 1517 into compliance and greater harmony with these other legislative sections like 1513, 14, and 15. So by removing the exemption, we treat schools and libraries and museums just like everyone else in regards to distributing materials that is harmful to minors. It doesn't matter whether you're the 7-Eleven clerk, an adult movie theater, or a public library. You can't distribute, as we've outlined in previous code, you can't distribute material harmful to minors, period, as defined in this state law. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would appreciate your consideration of protecting minors from this harmful material as outlined. Thank you.
You've heard debate. Is there further debate on the motion? You've heard the motion. Is there further debate? Lady from 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good lady from 14 yield to a question?
Good lady yield.
The lady yields.
Lady yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, good lady. You indicated in your prefatory remarks that you consider this an objective standard, which I'm glad you addressed because that was one of my concerns was the subjectivity. But I guess by way of illustration, I'm curious because as I look at this, one of the books that came to mind was a youth classic. I think it's Judy Blume's Forever, which I think is actually how I learned what I knew at the age about male sexuality. And it depicts a teenage boy who has erections and masturbates and wet dreams. And it's kind of intended actually for a younger audience to introduce these concepts. I am curious whether that would run afoul because it seems to fall explicitly under some of these categories in terms of overtly describing sexual excitement, masturbation, etc.
Mr. Speaker.
Is that your understanding?
Speaker,
From 13.
would you put the House at ease?
Yep.
Thank you. And I'd like to have majority and minority leadership as well as the sponsor.
Come on up. House will be in order. Before going at ease, we were answering questions. Would the good lady from 14 care to respond? Good lady from 18.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. My question was completed. I yield to the lady for a response.
Good lady from 14 care to respond to the question? The lady refuses to yield. No further debate on the motion. Hearing none, would the good lady from 26?
To ask a question of the good lady from 14, if I may.
Does the good lady know the answer to the question, or are we going to go down the sensationalized stuff
No,
we have to go?
my,
Okay, then the
I
good
will
lady
explain
from
a little
14
further.
yield to a question.
Reluctantly yields.
Lady,
Thank you, and I'm not being difficult. I see the exemptions. I've looked at the folder and whatnot. My concern is for museums. As we take our children to museums, and I've been all over the world and whatnot, I'm concerned about the statement and not giving them necessarily the exemption in there, because as I go through the museum, there are statues that have nudity all over in them. And we have the museum context, and I'm very concerned with that. Somebody could say, I don't want that, and we end up with a case of, is it the curator of the museum that's liable not to let a minor in because they're judging those famous works of art? Or is whose fault? Who becomes liable of not letting you into that museum?
good lady from 14.
Mr. Speaker, good lady, I think that I perhaps have already addressed this, so we may already have the answer before us to that question, and that is found in 1514. Again, furthermore, if I may read from present code, current code. Furthermore, no work or performance is harmful to minors if, when considered as a whole, it possesses serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. Indeed, we do have the Miller versus California that further explains that with its 3 points, and so I believe that we have everything in front of us to answer that question.
Good lady from 26. Is there further debate? Good lady from 6.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I've got a couple of questions, if the good lady would yield to question.
Lady from 14 yield.
Lady yields.
Lady yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good lady. So I have a nephew who graduated from high school young, went to UCLA, and if he had gone to the University of Idaho or Idaho State, should he then, should we censor the types of material at a college or university because there's a person under the age of 18 attending? I'm just wondering, how do we deal with that?
Good lady from 14.
Mr. Speaker and good lady, I'm sorry, District 6, thank you. I should have known that. Thank you. Good lady from 6. In terms of minors, I think, again, the law is clear, and I think that we would honor the law.
Further debate. Good lady from 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is really a difficult situation. We have colleges and universities across our great state. And while we don't particularly like some of the documentation or publications or whatever or what have you, there are art classes that study the human body. There are many types of classes. I would prefer if we had a bill that would allow a library to have a section that minors were not allowed in. But to just blanketly say that we cannot have this information in our public libraries is a concern to me, not because I believe that we should have pornographic information and readily available, but folks, we have what's called the internet, and while I don't like it, our children are subjected to this every day. And is that good? No, but can we legislate morality everywhere? I just am very concerned about this. This is an election year, and I know that some of these things are, I'm just not even going to go there. But I am very concerned that we are going down a
Mr.
path.
Speaker,
Good lady from 33.
I've not done this in my 5 years here, but I do object to that. And especially me, this has nothing to do with an election.
Good lady, care to proceed knowing the objection?
Thank you very much. However, what I'm trying to say here, folks, is that we could run afoul, and in terms of, we have constitutionality issues that easily could come up. These are public libraries, and that really is a concern for me. And it's a challenge for me to say I vote no, because I'm conflicted because of what I understand and what my heart says, but also there are many other things that we have to take into consideration. And unfortunately, because of that, I could not support this bill.
Is there further debate? This gentleman from 10.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was initially cautious about this bill until I got to looking a bit closer. The good lady from 14 has done a good job of detailing for the body the existing law, but I'd just like to highlight a few points. First of all, the case that the good lady mentioned, which is Miller versus California, sorry about that, establishes the what it is that can be considered obscene and what can be regulated. And, you know, I think it was Justice Potter famously said, "I can't define pornography for you, but I know it when I see it." This is one of those situations. And so there's a three-part test in Miller. And the reason this Supreme Court case from the early 70s is important is because it is legally impossible to successfully use this statute to prosecute somebody contrary to the holding in Miller. Even if somebody tried, an overzealous prosecutor tried, the holding in Miller would ultimately be the backstop for what could be prosecuted. And that three-pronged test is this. One, when taken as a whole, according to local community standards. If that's a college town, that might be different. According to local community standards, appeals to the prurient interest. In other words, it's intended to be erotic, based on what that community would consider to be improper. Second, and that's a reasonable person standard. Second is if it depicts or describes sexual content in an offensive way. And then third, if it lacks any serious artistic, scientific, or educational value. Our predecessors took that exact language and put it into the code. The good lady from 14 just pointed it out in code. And so where we're at here is if a library has something that has no serious literary, artistic, or scientific value, why do they have it? And artistic value, it paints a wide brushstroke, no pun intended. And so I also wanted to make clear that we're not criminalizing any activity. We're just taking away an affirmative defense, something that we would prosecute 1, 2, 3, 4 people out of 5 for, and for some reason there's an exception here. As the good lady pointed out, it had to be knowing. It's not as though, we all got the textbooks with the class ahead of us had written inappropriate drawings in, right? We didn't know that was in there until we got it checked out. Back when we used to do textbooks, we all remember that. It doesn't mean that a librarian checks out a book to somebody and oops, there was something in there that he or she didn't realize. That's not knowing. It's not knowing if somebody looks around the corner and sees something that they shouldn't have seen. If the person looking at it isn't aware. Now that shouldn't be going on, but it's not as though we have people out there that can just grab up people and start prosecuting them because of what's in the library. So it has to be knowing, and it has to pass the Miller test. One of my first questions was, well, what about? I mean, there's some medieval art, some ancient Roman art that's pretty whoa. Well, it has historic value, it has literary value, it has artistic value, and so as far as being afraid that the Statue of David is going to elicit some sort of criminal charge, it won't. It won't. That's taken care of. You have to go a long way. I was even concerned about certain biology books that were a little too descriptive. But again, that has an educational value. It's already taken care of, both in Idaho Code and in United States Supreme Court case law interpreting the First Amendment. It's already taken care of. So the good lady's not brought this bill in a vacuum. There's all of these other elements, all of these other sections of law, both statutory and case law, constitutional, that when you look at it in its totality, it's not nearly as scary. In fact, the existence of these affirmative defenses is a little odd in the first place. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would say that all of the things that we're most concerned about, we're not looking to target somebody. We're not. And I recognize that 5 minutes of one of my kids getting a hold of a friend's cell phone could be more dangerous than anything this bill is going to stop. I get that. But if we can stem the tide at least some and make sure that if this stuff is for whatever reason in the libraries, I don't know why something without literary value would be in a library. Again, I know I said that before. If there is something like this in a library, that it's put up, that it's careful. This isn't calling for a book burning out in front of the Capitol. This is reasonable, and I would ask for your green light.
Is there further debate? Good gentleman from 16.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I want to start with a baseline. So I think we can all agree that none of us wants to see pornography in our schools, in our colleges and universities, in our museums, in our public libraries. I think we can all agree on that. The concern, as it's been brought to me by my local library, they took the time to write not just one of the form emails that we always get, but they took the time to write something that was meaningful for my local Garden City library. They were concerned with that they might become targeted by subjective claims regarding the dissemination of material harmful to a minor. They also wanted me to know that the Garden City Public Library already has a strong collection development policy and strong local oversight. And so I trust that in my little 12,000 person community, that not just me, but any member, if they have children, if they have grandchildren, if it is the children who are going to my local library, I feel very comfortable, and I trust the people who work in my local library, that they're going to do the right thing and that they have the right policies in place so that harmful material is not going to be distributed to them. That's in this little 12,000 person library, or community supporting these 12,000 folks. Now, at the same time, I also received a comparable email from the largest city in our state. And they basically reiterated the same thing, that they also have these strong collection development policies. And so with that, not just the small town, but the big town, that we have policies in place, at least in my area. I feel very confident in the work that they are doing. Now, the one thing that I do want to express my biggest concern about, and the good gentleman from TIN, he had some really good points with regard to the Miller test. That's the obscenity test. And he talked about local community standards. So at the end of the day, that means what is it that's happening in my community, and we as a community really get to decide. As I was looking at the super secret folder that we were suggested to look at, knowing that this debate was coming. So I went and looked at the super secret folder. I did not find Playboy. I did not find Playgirl. I did not find Hustler. And I'm sorry, I don't know any of the other magazines besides those. But I didn't see any of those there. The things that I saw, while I would say that perhaps parents should, there would be wisdom if a parent or a grandparent was taking their child or grandchild to the library, perhaps depending on those parents' own individual value sets. That might be something that they should be reading with their child. Personally, and this is all going to depend on age too, for my grandchildren, some of them are old enough that we can probably have some healthy discussions about some of the literature that was contained in the folder. Some of them are way too young to be exposed to that material. And in our local libraries, those are going to be set apart. So again, I feel like our libraries are doing a good job, and what we don't want to have are our local libraries being subjected to subjective claims. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be a no.
Is there further debate? Good gentleman from 29.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is an area I don't think we've touched on yet, and I just thought I'd mention it. So when you read the bill, this code section 18-1517, these are referred to as affirmative defenses in the law, and I think the distinction is important, so if you just stick with me for a second. So if you are a defendant in a case, and that is what each of these subsections is contemplating, you could be a defendant who thought the person was a minor, that's one of them. A person who is a parent, you can prove you're a parent, then that's an exception. And then you have the defendant was a bona fide school, college, university, acting in that capacity as an employee of such, with and serving, or let's say, and serving the educational purposes of such an organization. So the way an affirmative defense works is if you're the defendant, the burden shifts to you, and now you have to be able to prove that you fit within one of those categories. Okay, so for example, you work for a museum. You would have to prove that you're a bona fide museum, and this thing that you were doing was serving the educational purposes for the organization. In other words, it's kind of well thought out. So just because you say I'm a museum is not good enough, or I'm an employee of museum is not good enough. It has to be both I'm an employee of museum and this thing that you found that you dislike was serving the educational purposes of the organization. So you got to be able to prove that. Here's why I think that's important, and it's different than these other subsections that we just looked at, thinking that somebody was an adult as opposed to a minor and those others. The reason it's important is when you remove that protection from a museum, college, university, a school, a public library, they are not going to go through the very good analysis that the gentleman from District 10 did for us. And I'm afraid what they're just going to do is they're just going to default on uber safe, and there's going to be a lot of material that they're just not going to take a chance on. Material that really is good and educational and that I think is helpful to our communities, to our kids, probably isn't all that controversial, but when you take away these protections and you're a librarian, I've known a few librarians in my life, they are not risk takers. Now, I know that's a across-the-board judgment on librarians. They're wonderful people, but they are not risk takers. Do you think any of them want to be subject to a misdemeanor, possible jail time, a fine? So I think this was well thought out when it was put in here. It provides the protections our communities need, and I hope you'll think about that before you vote. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Good lady from 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I promise I will keep it very clean. But I really want to underscore what we've heard, but I think we really do have a pretty fundamental subjectivity problem here, particularly when this section is removed. I mean, it's kind of axiomatic in criminal law that you run into a due process problem when you have vagueness. Criminal laws have to be crystal clear. You need to send a bright red line to the public on when they are violating the law and when they are not. And you really can't be mushy on that without running afoul of due process guarantees of the Constitution. And I think that, you know, part of what saves the original statute, I don't actually know if the original statute would really survive a really hard run at it under due process questioning, frankly. But I think without this Section D, it would really be in trouble. Because part of what makes it okay under Miller, part of what makes it okay under due process is that it does have this protection. Because you have this vagueness where you don't really know what someone might consider harmful to a minor, but at least you have this penumbra, this safe harbor, where if you're involved in the educational arena, you don't have to worry about it. And you don't have to worry about whose opinion is what and who thinks what's harmful. You strip that out, and I think you create a real constitutional problem. And frankly, I think our debate here really kind of proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that we have a real subjectivity problem here. I provided a brief overview of what is considered a classic of young adult fiction and used the words of the statute, and I was all but gavelled down. Clearly, under this, that brief, you know, I don't think it would violate Miller, but it clearly didn't accord with the prevailing standards in this adult community. So I, as I stand here, have absolutely no idea where that line lies. Truly don't. I tried to get a question from the bill sponsor. I don't know. I truly don't know as I stand here. How in the world is any librarian facing potential criminal sanctions going to know? They absolutely cannot, and I think as a result, this is absolutely unconstitutionally vague and ambiguous, and it's very unfair to our librarians and educators to ask them to operate in a world where they have absolutely no idea what is legal and what is not, and what will send them to jail and what will not.
Is there further debate? Good gentleman, 12.
Mr. Speaker, to debate in favor of the bill.
Gentleman has the floor.
You know, some of that material that was sent out to us in State Affairs, I looked around the room. People are opening their folders and throwing them across the desk. So I opened mine, I got to page 2 or 3, did the same thing. It was so obscene, I can't unsee that. And I have some experience with this stuff, and I'm going to explain that in a bit. I would rather my 6-year-old grandson start smoking cigarettes tomorrow than get a view of this stuff one time at the public library or anywhere else. I used to prosecute under the old obscenity statute in this county successfully, and we did not prosecute the stuff that you're all worried about being prosecuted, rightfully so. It was pretty bad and awful. But I remember I was a young prosecutor, and my liberal, excuse the form, question, but my liberal professor that I just graduated from law school, he went on the news and said, I'll never get that conviction. This will be overturned. Well, I got the conviction. It wasn't overturned. This is an okay statute to go forward. I would ask that you give this a green light.
Thank you, good gentleman. Is there further debate? Good gentleman from 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The America that I grew up in, that I was born in, that I grew up in, that I love, does not write bills and create laws that throw librarians in jail. And that's what this bill threatens. And this bill, Mr. Speaker, serves to intimidate through the threat.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's right to assign motive to the bill sponsor.
I would appreciate that the good gentleman from 15 adhered to some of her concerns.
You bet. So, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker, and I dare say the opinion, I suspect, of just about every librarian or museum curator who will not sit back and say, but you know, Miller says that we're okay. I just don't think they're going to say that, with all due respect to my colleague from District 10. This bill, they will be encouraged to sanitize, to censor, for fear of being prosecuted, persecuted by groups that don't like certain content. That's not the America that I grew up in. That's not the world I want my children to grow up in, or our grandchildren.
Further debate. Good gentleman from 34.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I first started researching the aspects of this bill and learning about this topic, I was stunned and sickened to see what has been found in Idaho libraries and schools. Yeah, it's a super secret folder, and it's super secret because it is so disgusting, and didn't want it out on the desks where everyone could see it or people could see it when they're walking by the desks. It's amazing what is out there. The good gentleman from 16 says that he looked at it and there were some things in there that parents would be wise to consult their kids with and everything. And I agree. This is parents who should be making this decision. Not necessarily schools, libraries, and teachers. We put our trust in schools and libraries and teachers all the time. And this bill only becomes enforceable to the extent that those institutions violate that trust. I suspect that if libraries, schools, school boards, library boards are worried whether something may or may not cross the line, I think that they will err on the safe side. What is wrong with erring on the safe side of the line? Where there's doubt, just say, well, there's doubt on this one. Let's err on the safe side and say, you know what? That's not virtuous, lovely, or praiseworthy, or of good report. That's something that we shouldn't have in our schools. If there's doubt, I would expect the libraries and schools to err on the safe side. This is not about putting librarians or teachers in jail. We have rules about serving alcohol to underage minors, not because we want to put bartenders in jail. It's because we want to protect kids from dangerous things. That's what this bill is about, protecting kids from dangerous things. If we're making a key decision like this and we're worried about librarians or teachers feeling persecuted, I would rather err on the side of a librarian or two feeling persecuted or feeling worried than having children feel polluted and damaged because of what is being served up in schools and libraries. We see limitations on all sorts of rights for the sake of protecting minors. Minors can't go see certain movies. Minors can't be served up certain literature from a convenience store. Minors can't consume alcohol or tobacco. We have laws and rules about adults providing that kind of dangerous stuff to kids, and we say it's just not allowed. Well, this is another one of those areas. It's not a constitutional problem to protect kids from dangerous and harmful materials, and that's what this is. It just removes the affirmative defense for these institutions, and the same test applies. The Miller versus California test, it's almost spelled out in our statutes as well. That's their protection if they want it. And if they're worried about crossing the line, I say this bill just keeps us well on the safe side of the line and keeps our kids well out of danger. Thank you.
For further debate, good lady from 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Debate in favor of the bill.
Lady has the floor.
One of these bills was brought to my attention a couple years ago, and I wanted to make copies to share with constituents and with other legislators. And I actually called the AG's office and said, if I use the print machine at the Capitol, am I going to get in trouble for distributing or copying pornography? And that was two or 3 years ago. And then I noticed in this new material, some of it's taken from the same book, they had upgraded those, or I don't know, downgraded the pictures would probably be a better word. They had downgraded these pictures to where they were more graphic and they were more sexually deviant, I could say. And so that was disturbing to me, that there's this trend to go in one direction. That was disturbing. That being said, I would encourage any Republican or Christian in this room that is planning to vote against this bill to take 5 minutes and go walk into the clerk's office and actually look at some of this material before you put a no vote on this bill. It is wrong. It's pornography being pushed on our children, and I think this is a good bill.
For further debate, the gentleman from 13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Debate in favor of the bill.
The gentleman has the floor.
When I first saw it, I thought for sure I was not going to vote for the bill that said 666. You know, as the gentleman from District 15, he talked about librarians in the America he grew up in. I can't imagine that librarians of the past would ever let this kind of material that we're discussing today be in front of our children. We talk about minors like they're a general demographic. But to me, that's my son. That's my neighbor's son. That's all the kids in my neighborhood that come to my cul-de-sac and play. We live in a fallen world. And it is so hard to protect our kids. As is, the access is everywhere. I'm going to support this bill, absolutely. I hope you will too, for our kids.
For further debate, good lady from 35.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I actually serve in the State Affairs Committee, and I feel compelled to add a few things that we saw and heard in committee. There was a man that actually came in who had pulled books off the shelves of the juvenile and the younger children's areas that were very offensive. He read a couple things out of there. And so they are in our libraries in Idaho, in this local area. There was also a letter from a daughter whose father had committed suicide, and he had been exposed to pornography at a very young age. And what's in that folder, if that's not pornography, I don't know what is. And it is available to our children, our grandchildren, our neighbors, as the gentleman from 13 was talking about as well. Years and years ago, I found a book that one of my kids had the book, and I've found it offensive from a local library, and I actually tried to get it pulled, and it didn't get pulled. They didn't see a problem with it. And so a couple of parents actually expressed that, how their library boards are not receptive to what they're concerned about. And so we have that in the mix as well. So I just would encourage you to, if we have to, err on the side of our children and our posterity. Thank you.
For further debate, good gentleman from 22.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen. I don't sit on state affairs, so I didn't have the hearing, but I happened to run by some of my colleagues as they were printing up copies of the material that went to the state affairs. And I can tell you, as a 72-year-old, I was offended by that material. And I hope that none of my grandkids ever go to a library where they can get their hands on it. It's entirely offensive to anybody here. And we can talk about the America I grew up in. They wouldn't allow this stuff to be handed out to kids or to even be in the library. And I urge you to vote yes on this bill. It's time we have some standards that we have to abide by. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further debate. The gentleman from 26, I'd make a smart comment. But
I've been trying. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has the floor.
A couple of things. First of all, I also looked at the super secret folder. I've seen several more shocking things in my life than anything that was contained in there, but one thing did particularly stick out to me, and that was just a random photo of a multiracial family with no context, no nothing, and somehow that was obscene. And I wonder what is going on when somehow that's included with no other context. Just a picture, no words, no nothing. What's obscene about a multiracial family? I have no idea. But that was in that super secret folder, and I'd appreciate an answer about it. You know, the good gentleman from District 34 talked a lot about how we need to make sure that we are protecting our kids. Well, all the library boards and all the librarians all across this state have already done that. They have gone through a book review process. They don't just take any book off the street. You can't go to your library and you can't buy a Playboy. You can't buy a Hustler. You can't, or excuse me, check out a Playboy or a Hustler or any other dirty magazine. But you can check out a book that is something that you are interested in. And the library board has already made the determination that that is okay. But now what we are going to do is we are going to force library boards and librarians all across the state to go through and reread every single book, because this might be objectionable to some family somewhere in this state. And now we are at risk of being criminally cited and having a fine. We are going to lose books that have tremendous amounts of literary goodness. We are going to lose books that have been in our libraries for generations. We potentially could lose the Bible, because there are several exceptionally offensive verses in the Bible. I've got them printed out. If anybody would like me to read them, I'm absolutely happy to. But we are walking down a very dangerous road under the guise of protecting our families. And I really think that everyone needs to consider what is harmful to you may not be harmful to another family, but it will have a very, very harmful effect on our discourse and on our literacy moving forward. Vote no.
So further debate. Good gentleman from 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't going to talk, but I can't hold myself back. This is going to be personal, and I'm going to try to get through it. When my daughter was young, we thought we knew a family really well, and we let them have sleepovers. Well, come to find out, the gentleman was grooming these young girls, and he was using soft pornography, and he moved up in nature with that stuff. But I can just see how a pedophile could very easily say, this is a library book. We got it from the library. This can't be bad. Now, I don't know that that's going to happen, but I know what happened to this incident. And I know the psychiatry bills that I've been paying since then from this. So this will help that situation, and we need to get this crud out of our education systems and our libraries. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Good lady from 31 who's on the phone. Good gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady has the floor.
To debate in favor of the bill. I would like to address the question from the good gentleman from 26, to which he requested a response about the beautiful picture of the smiling multiracial children. And I would like to offer a quick explanation. You know, when we prepared those folders for the State Affairs Committee, by the time I finished looking at those pictures, I felt so sick. I thought, we've got to give people something nice to look at when they're done with this. So I found a beautiful picture of smiling children and put it on the top of the stack. So just please know that there's certainly no intent to imply that those beautiful children were in any way captured as something that's somehow inappropriate. I would like to also speak to something that I think we should all be able to agree on, and that is the fact that we need standards. It was just stated that we don't have Playboy, we don't have hard pornography in the children's section in the library. And one of the things I thought was really interesting as we were hearing testimony in our State Affairs Committee is that we had a librarian who came and the question was asked, well, if I request the Playboy magazine to be ordered and placed in the children's section, will you do that? And the librarian said, well, no, we won't do that because we have a standard. And we have been able to work with that standard. And no librarians have gone to jail because we don't allow hard pornography in the juvenile section of the library. So we do need standards. It sounds like maybe there's some disagreement about what that standard should be. But I can tell you that having seen the books and the samples that were provided to the members of the State Affairs Committee were just a small portion of what is available in Idaho libraries. That material is clearly offensive according to prevailing standards, as evidenced by the fact that we do not have it on the floor right now. And if I were to proceed to describe to you what is in those materials, I would also be gavelled down. Clearly, this material is offensive to prevailing standards about what is appropriate for minors. We need standards. It is our job to set standards, and the standard that we currently have with this affirmative defense in place in regard to obscenity is not working. As evidenced by the samples that have been provided to this body, it is time to raise the standard. Why do we raise the standard? Because free speech is not more important than protecting a child. As was stated by the good gentleman from 6, when we hypersexualize a child, we cause harm. And it's not okay to use taxpayer dollars and public facilities to harm people's children. This is a good and reasonable bill. It sets a uniform standard that already exists, and I urge your support. It's a good thing to be safe when it comes to children and the potential to sexualize or harm them.
Is there further debate? The lady from 11.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to debate in favor of the bill.
The lady has the floor.
Thank you. I had the opportunity, I'm not on State Affairs, but I had the opportunity to watch this debate, and I found it very interesting because I saw this stuff starting to creep into our schools and our libraries probably about 10 or 12 years ago, and it shocked me then, and it shocks me just as much now. I wanted to just mention that one of the booklets, one of the pieces of material that is in that packet was sent to a prison in Washington State where they graciously sent it back because they said that it was too sexually explicit and obscene for their prisoners. And this piece of material was geared for 6th graders, 10-year-olds. And so that's some of the booklets that we're dealing with. You know, if you or I were to give out some of the information that is in that packet, we might be charged with distributing harmful material to a minor. And I think that that is just unbelievable if we're allowing this information, these booklets and such, to be distributed into our schools and our libraries. But if you and I were to do that, that we could be charged in regards to that ourselves. So as a parent, I am grateful for this type of legislation. I think it is duly needed, and that we do need to protect our children. There is a lot of garbage that they're exposed to each and every day all over the place, and this is one step to try to protect them from being harmed by that. And I hope having this discussion and having this debate will wake parents up, and that they will take a firsthand approach to what is in their libraries, in their local libraries and in their school libraries, and what's being given out for educational purposes, and that they'll take note of that and look into it, because I think a lot of parents are not aware of what their children are getting their hands on. And so I hope that this gives them the necessity to do that. So I'll be supporting this legislation. Thank you.
For further debate? Hearing none. Good lady from 19.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Hopefully I'm the last one.
I don't think you will be.
Very well. I would love to have a conversation about protecting our kids from the violent, graphic pornography that is all over the internet. I would love to talk about how we can help parents put the controls in place to help them monitor and block those things. That's where the big risk is, and that's where we should be focused. This bill does not help with any of that, and in fact, it's misguided, and the result is absurd. Criminalizing a librarian who helps a teenager locate a title on the shelf. When the teenager asks for help, the librarian doesn't know necessarily that there might be an explicit passage deep within a novel. Librarians don't read every single book, and so they might knowingly help someone find that, and they're doing their job, and it's unfair to put them in the job of policing some of these things. That's really the parent's job, and that's what it comes down to, because parents need to make these calls, because parents are going to have a range of different opinions on what's suitable for their kids. So we need to put this in the parents and make sure that they're being responsible. The subjectivity of this bill is also deeply problematic. And I perused the materials that were made available. There were certainly some strong graphic depictions that I am very confident are not on a children's library shelf. But there was also, I noticed on one of the titles that was included, a best-selling sex education book for families. Over 1 million copies sold. So 1 million families thought that book was a good resource to educate their kids and families. Maybe there's another 1 million families that don't appreciate that resource. But that gets to the heart of how subjective this is. And that's why we need parents to take an active role in deciding when, how, and what materials their children can access. If I'm a parent who wants to be on high alert about these things, and I am, I go to the library with my kids. I ask them questions about their reading, and because that's my role. It is so inappropriate to put this on the criminal justice system and threaten our librarians with jail time. There are so many other ways we could address this problem. The concept of standards is brought up. We could talk about that. We could talk about having adult books in a separate section that children aren't allowed to enter. But putting librarians in jail and using our criminal statute to address this is is beyond heavy-handed and frankly frightening. So I urge your red light.
To further debate, good lady from 33.
I don't really need the light, but Mr. Speaker, I stand to debate in favor of the bill. Okay, excellent, thank you. Kind of interesting, first team, as I listen to some of that which is being said, does remind me of a sporting event. If I were coaching and I was listening to some of that which was said, I would call it misdirection. Misdirection because we think we're going one way and then we go another direction. What we're really talking about here is we are talking about explicit sexual content. And as I sit and I listen, I am listening to people argue in favor of explicit sexual content. And I am baffled. This subject matter is incredibly sensitive to me. I worked on legislation such as this a couple years ago, and I also worked on library legislation with good lady from 30, because we are so concerned about what's going through our libraries and what our kids are exposed to. And then, of course, you know about my sexuality opt-in legislation that twice this body, I believe party lines, voted for. And as I explored all of the material, when we were looking at content available to our kids in our schools, it's beyond what you're even seeing here. And that is why it's important that our parents are involved. This is not something to take lightly. This is something that we need to say no to. I love the idea of saying we need to have standards, because we do. And again, when a child, I know this has been said, but this is an important point that we talk about all the time amongst us. I would rather a child learn about CRT than be exposed to sexuality and sexuality content. Once that's in their mind, especially those young minds, they can't unsee, nor can we, but that child can't unsee, and you cannot undo the damage that is done. I can unteach some of the stuff in the books that I don't like. I cannot unteach the graphic images that either they see or they imagine. Impossible to do. I better not say impossible, leave some held to it. Highly unlikely. Those who we've mentioned, or it's been mentioned that we have some policies in place and this doesn't really apply. Great, then it doesn't apply. No harm done. No harm done. Your library's fine. Let us move on. Let's deal with the libraries and the schools where this is applicable. And I'm telling you, the people with whom I work and pretty closely, that I would say is a national leading authority on this material, it's all over Idaho. We are not the exception. We are very much the norm. It's just unbelievable to me how we are arguing in favor of this. We are, let me just remind you of this also, we are a constitutional republic. You've heard me say that, some of you, a number of times now. In a constitutional republic, morality and religion matter. If morality and religion doesn't matter, then let us be libertarians. But in a constitutional republic, religion and morality matter. And I just want to point that out because it's incredibly important. Parents do need to be involved in this. You see, if a parent wants to buy this kind of books or material, or if they want to go rent it and take it home, they're not prevented from doing that. Their children can see this, and they can see it at home with them where they can have those kind of conversations. And I think that's fine if that's important to the parent, but do it together. And lastly, I did call one of the people who serves on our library board to ask how she would feel, well, more than one, how they would feel if we put this law into effect. They're fine with it. They would love to have some help. So I am going to ask you, with everything that is important to me, do not do this to our children. This is a time to take courage, stand up and say no, that we do have to have standards, and we have hit a point. The sexuality content that is in the libraries and the schools right now, it was not even close. As a matter of fact, some of these images, I didn't know and I didn't understand until college. That is the honest to heck truth. This is beyond what is acceptable and what is acceptable in our First Amendment rights.
Is there further debate? For what purpose did the gentleman rise?
Debate for the second time, very briefly.
Is there anybody who wishes to debate for the first time? I think everybody's debated. All right, gentlemen, you have the floor.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the good lady of District 33. I don't want my debate to be mischaracterized. I'm not for pornography. I'm not supporting pornography in libraries. My debate simply is that I am against throwing librarians in jail as a remedy for that. So please do not mix the two issues. Thank you.
Is there further debate for the second time? Good gentleman from 16.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I want to come back to the statute. And the statute in 1815-14, and it is referred to in the Miller test. The question would become if the work possesses serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. Now, among the 70 of us adults, elected adults in the room, there's clearly division on what we would apply to what we would want our kids to see. The question isn't so much that, though, although I'll come back to this in a second. The question really is there literary, artistic, political, or scientific value? The materials that are in the super secret folder, I've heard it described as disgusting. I think it's meh. Nah. I don't see it with the same disgusting eye. I think that there is literary or artistic or political or scientific value to some of the materials that were contained in the super secret folder.
So further debate for the second time. Good lady from 24, for what purpose do you rise?
I rise to, I think, just declare potential Rule 80. I have a wonderful stepdaughter who is a librarian who cares for the children very much.
Thank you, good lady. And your declaration will be noted in the journal. Is there further debate for the second time? Good lady from 18.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I wanted to clarify that I also am not in favor of children consuming pornography, but I think we're being presented with a false choice here, that the only two paths we have are totally wild, unrestrained world in which children have unfettered access to pornography, or we throw librarians in jail. And that is what this bill does. People have said this is not about throwing librarians in jail. That's actually exactly what it is about. It is about opening librarians up to being thrown into jail for materials in their library. There are many other paths to consider here. There are many other, I think, far more constitutional avenues to ensure that there are appropriate materials in our library short of incarcerating librarians.
Good lady from 6.
To debate for the second time.
Good lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, want to be very clear. I am not one that would support any kind of pornography to children. My biggest concern is that this bill strikes all college, universities, and museums and public libraries. School libraries really are addressed I think otherwise, but my district has two colleges, a university and a college, where oftentimes there are courses in sexuality taught in different types of fields. I personally did not go look in the secret file, but I get the picture, and didn't think I needed to, but when we take this out, and on our campuses, there are kids that go in and out of our colleges with or without their parents. Sometimes parents take them into the college library because they're doing work and the kids are milling around, and so if the parent is there and not keeping their child right with them, and we have a 12 or 13-year-old boy or girl, and they wander to a section, are we then to put blame and say that the college or university should be held liable for that? That's what this bill is doing. And they cannot use an affirmative defense that says, I mean,
shaking her head, but honestly, that's how I read it. And if they cannot use that as an affirmative defense to say, you know, they were there, they were with this child, I had no idea, well, maybe then they'll fall under that. But it does concern me because colleges and universities should be held in a different level, I guess, because sometimes these instructors and there are assignments. I remember when I was in college, and I went as a non-traditional student. One of the assignments was on racism. Is racism still alive and well in America? And I did research and had to find sources that were very uncomfortable. But that was to teach. It was a learning experience. And we had to discuss it in class. So I just caution us that we need to be careful. Yeah, I don't want my grandchildren looking at that. I don't want them seeing that. But couldn't we just, I think we're maybe, again, looking for a problem that I don't see that exists with my children. I don't think they ever saw anything like that in a school. But in saying that, my biggest concern is with our colleges, universities, museums. It's there. And this is a real struggle, as I told you before, because it's a very difficult thing for me to say. If I say I vote no on this, I'm going to have people say, you support, as one of our colleagues said, we're arguing. No, I don't think anybody in here is arguing that we want to have children see pornographic materials. But I just am saying we need to be careful because we are opening ourselves up, in my opinion, to some real problems. Thank you.
Further debate for the second time. Hearing none. The good lady from 14 care to close, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be brief. I appreciate the healthy debate. I would not have expected less from my colleagues here. I think that we are simply asking that those that are responsible for the materials in our libraries or in museums or in the other places that are listed in this code are handled sensitively and responsibly. There needs to be more vigilance, period. And we know there needs to be more vigilance because even our American College of Pediatrics has made a statement very recently that this kind of material is harmful to minors. So I don't think it is asking too much for additional vigilance, particularly given that there is not subjectivity, that we do have definitions. As a matter of fact, the Miller, as we heard, the Miller versus California ruling, that is captured within code within 1815-14. No one needs to go any further. They don't need to look that up. We have put it, those that have come before us have put it in code, and it has been there for decades. So the subjectivity, again, is, I think, very clearly stated in Section 1514. Between Section 1514 and 1515, that it has to be knowingly given or distributed to a minor, again, is an added protection and a higher level. And we ask for this increased vigilance in protecting our students, or our children, including students at colleges and universities. So with that, I would invite your green light to protect children from harmful images.
Debate is closed. The question is, shall House Bill 666 pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine. Clerk will unlock the machines. Members will record the roll. Votes, excuse me. Has every member voted? Excuse me. Does any member wish to change their vote? The clerk will lock the machine. The clerk will lock the machine. The clerk will lock the machine and record the pairs.
Nash votes nay. Shepard votes aye. Boyle votes aye. Chu votes nay. Youngblood votes aye. Matthias votes nay. Syme votes nay. Armstrong votes aye.
51 ayes, 14 nay, 5 absent and excused. Majority having voted in favor of House Bill 666. House Bill 666 has passed the House. Is there correction to title?
No correction to title.
Hearing none, the title is approved and the bill will be transmitted to the Senate.